The Supreme Court said this evening that the abortion pill mifepristone would remain widely available for now, delaying the potential for an abrupt end to a drug that is used in more than half of abortions in the United States. The order halts a sweeping ruling by a federal judge in Texas who had declared the Food and Drug Administration's approval of the pill more than 2 decades ago invalid. As an appeal in the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit moves forward. A leading anti-abortion group blasted former President Donald Trump yesterday after his campaign said he believes states should decide abortion laws and not the federal government. Susan B. Anthony, Pro-Life America, issued a scathing response to a statement the Trump campaign made to the Washington Post when it was asked whether Trump supported the 6-week abortion ban a likely 2024 opponent, Governor Ron DeSantis, signed into law in Florida. A North Carolina man accused of shooting a man and his 6-year-old daughter was in custody yesterday in a case neighbors say began when a basketball rolled into the suspect's yard. Robert Singletary turned himself in to the authorities in Tampa, Florida, after a manhunt that began Tuesday night in Galveston County, North Carolina. Tennessee Republican who voted to expel Democrats resigns after ethics violation. State Representative Scotty Campbell stayed in office following the March ethics finding and an April 6th vote to expel Representatives Justin Jones and Justin Pearson, who have since been reinstated. Campbell's resignation comes hours after a Nashville TV station confronted him about sexual harassment allegations involving legislative interns. Well, President Joe Biden is preparing to make his intention to seek a second term official next week, with advisors planning to launch his re-election campaign as soon as Tuesday. The timing and the method of the announcement mirror how the Obama-Biden ticket launched its re-election bid in 2012. Today, FX is set to premiere Dear Mama, the saga of Afeni and Tupac Shakur, a 5-part docuseries that explores the lives of the late Afeni Shakur and her late son Tupac, the rapper, actor, poet, and political visionary. The series will also stream on Hulu. Dear Mama moves between the 1970s and 1990s to tell the story of Tupac and the woman who so powerfully shaped him, connecting hip-hop with Black activism and the struggle for human rights. This is Areva Martin in real time, and I'm your host, Areva Martin. This is your one-stop destination for today's trending news, expert analysis, and my unfiltered opinions. This is hour 2 of the show, and all week we've been paying tribute to Autism Awareness and Acceptance Month. And today I'm talking to 2 experts about implicit bias, systemic racism, and how systemic racism in particular has impacted the diagnosis and treatment of African Americans and Latino children in particular who live with autism. There's some startling reports out by the CDC as well as by other professional medical associations that acknowledge that racism, pervasive racism, has played a role in how kids get diagnosed and how they are treated. And, this is 2023, not 1953. So to think that the medical delivery system, that experts, clinicians who are given the power, the privilege of taking care of kids are allowing their own biases to impact who gets a diagnosis, how they get diagnosed, when they get diagnosed, and then what treatment looks like for individuals on the autism spectrum. I'm super excited to have joining me 2 experts who've been working on the issue of autism and implicit bias. When we come forward, Stephanie Keeney Parks from UCLA joins us, as well as Professor at Cal State LA, Sofya Bagdasaryan. Stay with us, KBLA Talk 1580.
Here comes the brand new flavor in your head. Race, social justice, sports, politics, art, music, culture. We do it all on the D.L. Hughley Afternoon Show. If you're not tuning in, then you are definitely missing out. It's the D.L. Hughley Afternoon Show, weekdays from 2 to 4, only on unapologetically progressive KBLA Talk 1580.
Like a brand new flavor in your head. Yeah.
Is the pen mightier than the sword?
They say the pen is mightier than the sword. At KBLA Talk 1580, we not only have a lot to talk about, we have a lot to write about. Politics, relationships, business, empowerment, and culture. The all-star roster at KBLA Talk 1580 has you covered.
That's what it's all about.
Be sure to follow us on all our socials for our latest book releases, op-eds, essays, and commentaries from our hosts. And, of course, download the KBLA 1580 app as we strive to remain your most trusted, credible, and reliable source for the issues you care about. This is unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580.
What up, baby?
I'm young, gifted, and black. KBLA Talk 1580, we do more than just talk.
Hey there, I'm Jared Hill, president of the National Association of Black Journalists of Los Angeles, and I just want to say thank you for the benevolent $10,000 donation and scholarships for the next generation of black journalists.
And I'm Haywood Galbraith, photojournalist and founder of the Minority Photojournalism Institute. Thanks, KBLA, for your generous $10,000 scholarship gift to help us train the next generation of black photojournalists.
Congratulations to all the students who will benefit from the scholarship dollars raised at our Black History Month luncheon, honoring black legends in LA media. When we come forward at KBLA Talk 1580, we're bringing everybody with us. Everybody with us. Everybody with us. Everybody with us. Everybody with us.
Access granted.
In a survey conducted by the public opinion research firm Eviderus, KBLA Talk 1580 consistently emerged as the station of choice for black audiences in the Los Angeles media market and beyond. The survey also revealed that the vast majority of black audiences are concerned about the lack of black-owned media and are more likely to listen to talk radio that focuses on issues that impact the black community. For some reason, the other talk stations haven't quite figured that out.
If you think about KFI, well, KFI only has like a 3% black listenership. 3%. So there's a good 97% out there to support a station like KBLA.
At KBLA Talk 1580, we've got your black. Your black. Your black.
Follow the leader.
KBLA Talk 1580.
Follow the leader.
Be sure to follow us on Instagram at KBLA 1580.
Follow the leader.
Are you ready?
April is Autism Acceptance and Awareness Month, and all week I have been highlighting certain aspects of the autism community. Yesterday, we actually talked to autism self-advocates. These were two young men who are thriving, and I wanted them to dispel some of the myths that people have about individuals who live on the autism spectrum. And they really helped us get a better understanding of what their lives are like and just how normal their lives are. But today I thought it was important to talk about race and systemic racism, because you wouldn't think that racism would be an issue necessarily associated with the diagnosis and treatment of autism. But yet during this period after George Floyd's murder, when this country was going through this racial reckoning and institutions were stepping up and acknowledging the role that they had played either with the transatlantic slave trade, or how their institutions had not been open and receptive to people of color, or how they had enacted anti-Black policies in their own organizations. We saw the Psychological Association come forward and acknowledge for the first time that I'm aware of that pervasive racism plays a part in the diagnosis and treatment of individuals with autism. So that was such a shocking and startling revelation and admission by this organization that I think it deserves us unpacking and trying to figure out, where are we today And what does it mean for a professional organization to make that kind of admission, particularly in light of the new CDC statistics that have come out just recently, identifying 1 in 36 African-American children and Latino children, 8-year-old children, saying that 1 in 36 of those children are on the autism spectrum. Super excited to have Stephanie Keeney Park. She's actually a mother of a child on the spectrum, and she's also an autism advocate. She is a PhD candidate at UCLA and professor at Cal State LA, Sofya Bagdasaryan, who does a lot of work around implicit bias and equity, diversity, and inclusion, is joining me in this hour. Thank you so much, Stephanie, and thank you so much, Sofya. I want to start with you, Stephanie. Just tell us a little about your journey as an autism mom, as well as someone who works in the field of disability rights and social justice.
Well, my work directly stems from being a mother of my son, like yours does, right? When your child's diagnosed, many of us are having our first experience with disability, and it can feel quite helpless at times. And then you start to understand the magnitude of the issues that we face. Our children are often wonderfully and perfectly created, but the systems that surround them, schools, for instance, or a difficulty in getting a diagnosis and things like this are happening for our communities. And oftentimes, many of us find our way into advocacy work. And for me, I don't have the capacity to run a major organization like the Special Needs Network, but I'm great at teaching and reading and researching. And so that's where I put my efforts in to help change the world for my son and my daughter who will inherit his care one day, right? Those are the ways that I know that I can be helpful in this fight. And for all of us, it will legitimately take every last parent to step and help where we can. It's that the fight is that big for us.
And so, Sofya, talk to us about this admission that the Psychological Association made about the role of racism and implicit bias in the diagnoses and treatment of kids with autism.
Well, and it's not just autism or any sort of cognitive or developmental disability. This structural racism and its impact on children and families can be felt in every structure, every system, every institution, not just psychological, not just like APA with psychology or psychiatry or health. We've known this forever. Those of us who study this know this, that from the inception of this country was built on slavery and genocide and racism. It's built into the fabric of every system. So of course it's going to have these kinds of effects. And you don't need racist people in order to have racially disparate outcomes. So, I use child welfare as the perfect example. Here you have social workers, some of the most anti-racist people you could probably find. We train them to be anti-racist. And yet we have huge disparities for African American and Native American children in that system. So how can that be? And yes, some of it could be implicit bias, but some of it is the policies that we have, the funding structures that we have. So it's the same when it comes to the diagnosis of disabilities. Is some of it related to implicit bias? Absolutely. But some of it is built into the system, the funding structure, the types of services that aren't being provided or get cut or what have you. So it's both folks on the ground implementing policies, but at some level, it's those laws and policies that need to change, which Areva, Special Needs Network, as you know, was instrumental in passing several pieces of legislation several years ago towards changing some of those structures. And the Public Council released a report that said South LA's regional center is a model that needs to be followed by other regional centers because they're among the very few, if not the only, that has seen some changes since those laws passed and since funding was increased.
Well, let me ask you, I think a lot of people, as you said, Sofya, maybe confuse the concept of someone personally being a racist with racially, with racist policies, or a system that is fraught with policies that disadvantage people of color. Help us better understand that distinction, that we're not talking about individuals per se who are quote unquote racist, but there's the systems. How can the systems be, racist if the people aren't? Because somebody may be saying, well, wait a minute, the systems don't operate without the people.
Absolutely. Well, one direct example has to do with translation of materials and having bilingual providers, or in our case, the lack of said. So when you don't fund, which the state, clearly hasn't provided enough funding to have translations available, and not just available where you have to go and get it, but provide them to where people live and where they go to church, where they go to other systems like doctors or clinics or what have you. If you don't make them available where people are to access them, then that means that the system in that sense is not providing the opportunity for people to access services in their language. And if we're not funding more bilingual providers, which again, Special Needs Network, I have to applaud in terms of your core training program that you've started to kind of address some of this, to get more culturally inclusive providers out there. But currently we don't have enough, then that's part of the system. And so if you have a Spanish-speaking or Korean-speaking parent with a special needs child, and they have to navigate 7 different systems in order to get services for their child, I, with a PhD, would have trouble with that. Right. And I have a child with a special health care need, so it's a little bit different. But when that happened to us and we had to navigate the system, I was constantly telling my husband, how do people who have to work 2 jobs and who don't speak English, how would they do this? I had the privilege of being able to take time off of work to take care of these things. But our lower SES neighbors don't. And so that provides a barrier. So when we're talking about disadvantages, we're talking about barriers to access. That's really the key when it comes to structural racism. So if you have a worker, who's maybe a wonderful person at the regional center, but someone comes in and they give them an application, they won't even give them an application. They'll tell them to go get a diagnosis somewhere else and then come back and then give them an application that's, the size of a Harry Potter book, and then expect them to just fill it out right there. That's a barrier that's being put in. It's a wall every single time. And yet that person may not, they're just doing their little piece of the job.
Yeah, let me ask you, great point. Stephanie, let me ask you, in your personal journey, have you experienced providers who you thought were dismissive of you because you're a Black woman, or providers that were dismissive of your son because he's a Black kid? Have you experienced any of this implicit bias?
It's not implicit. And that's something we have to be incredibly reflexive about and open about. If you want to actually make a difference in this system, we have to say, this might be my little piece in this system, but I am unwilling to change it. And therefore, I'm okay with the racism that this thing produces, right? I'm okay with that as a byproduct of my result to intervene and change the problem. And it's not just my personal life. Much of my research has taken place in medical schools where I watched clinicians learn to diagnose and treat autism across various fields, from developmental peds to occupational therapists to speech pathologists and whatnot. And racism is literally just baked into the system. It is so baked in that it's very very, very, very difficult to even piece out for somebody like me who's only paid to think about race. Like that's what I'm paid to do, is think about this particular problem. And it is just insanely
Give
difficult.
us some concrete examples, because you said it's baked into the system across
absolutely.
multiple disciplines. Give us some concrete examples.
Oh, absolutely. For example, just watching a professor was teaching a class at a medical school, and he was teaching how to diagnose autism, right? Doing what is the autism diagnostic observation schedule. And the classroom had maybe 50 or so various graduate level students in the room. And one of the students raised their hand and said, well, what happens if we run into culture into this in a test? And the professor, the faculty member said, it's not about culture, it's about how the patient responds. And that's not a thing.
Well, hold on a second, Stephanie. What did he mean when he said, what happens if we run into culture? What does that mean?
So part of what you're dealing with is that we don't kind of make sense of the fact that we use whiteness as an unmarked normative background, which that when we have something like, when I run into culture, that means when I run into a non-white individual, right? Because we use whiteness as the metric for which all—
Why did he just say, what happens when I have to diagnose a non-white person? What's this coded language?
Because they don't have the critical thinking kind of skill set that you would learn in something like anthropology, which I do, or, like the professor does in social work, those kind of critical, like, thinking skills that help people think through the intricacies of what is culture, what is the social world. Those really aren't taught in medical schools. They're largely based on biomedical models. This is a leg, this is what's in your bloodstream, right? And those things, like, yeah, a leg is a leg, but a leg exists in a larger social world, and thus has can your patient get food so that when they break their leg, they can nourish themselves and heal? Can they get back to therapy, right? Or are they on the bus line and that's too difficult? Or do you know what I mean? There's so many pieces that have to be taught in part and parcel with the medical system to help that expand enough to be able to make an intervention that's actually meaningful. And it has to also start with being willing to say something like, whiteness is the unmarked norm from which we are functioning. That's why your students are saying things like, what happens when we run into culture? Well, baby, you met a non-white person today. So that's what happens, and that's okay. But you have to be willing to have that kind of conversation and entertain the uncomfortableness that it does bring with it, right? It's awkward, but it's necessary.
And what was the response by the professor to that question? Did they understand?
No, they didn't understand. They didn't understand. They said it's not about culture. It's about response. But I think the professor and I would both tell you that responses are culturally kind of manufactured, right? The way that I speak with my hands is probably pretty typical to Black women. We speak with language and power and, passion. The way that, my son might respond, maybe he didn't code switch today because he has autism, and code switching isn't one of his strong suits, right? Things like this, every response that a person has is kind of culturally shaped and oriented, not even kind of, it just is. And so, those things make what are these kind of subjective diagnoses, especially in the world of autism, where it's the language diagnosis. What do you hear? Well, if your lens is only formed as, kind of a white male normative lens, then that's important to know, because that's the view from which you'll take. Just like my view is always going to be a Black mother of a child with autism, I'm never going to be able to displace that view, right? And so those are really, really important conversations to have, and they have to be less stigmatizing, because we have to have them. We have to be able to say, I'm, this type of person, I identify in this type of way, and that's the lens from which I'm functioning. So you can start to identify even where a bias might lie, right?
That's a really important point, Stephanie. I want to ask you, Professor Bagdasaryan, in your practice, have you seen a willingness to be honest, as Stephanie said, about the fact that, most of the standards and the norms are based on, white, male, mostly male, those standards? Have you, are people in these institutions, academic institutions, being honest about that? Or are they still, denying that reality?
We're getting there. I can speak about social work, that our competencies that are set by our accrediting body recently were revised to include, 3 of the competencies now include explicit reference to anti-racist practice. But I can tell you, in my experience in teaching students, and I think this applies generally also, is that people want to be quote unquote colorblind. They want to say, no, whether it's a doctor, a social worker, any helping professional, well, they're human. I'm just going to treat them as a human and everything will work out. I don't see color. And we have to really, in social work education, in particular, because we work with vulnerable populations, disadvantaged populations exclusively, is break that down to say no, just as Stephanie was mentioning, that we are all culturally, ethnically diverse, and that's okay. It's okay to be diverse. It's not okay to put that diversity in a hierarchy or within a system of patriarchy and other intersections, to where then, as you mentioned, Areva, where people do get dismissed. And, a lot of times it is mothers and mothers of color who are taking their children to get diagnosed. So when you have, or for services or what have you, so when you have, gender in that way, in terms of the patriarchy, it's a double dismissal, if you will.
Hold that thought for me, Professor, because when we come forward, I want to talk about what Stephanie said, that is not implicit. So the opposite of implicit is explicit. I want to get some examples of how this explicit bias plays out in the diagnosis of kids on the spectrum. Stay with us, KBLA Talk 1580.
If you're not listening to Tavis Smiley weekday mornings on KBLA Talk 1580, you're missing out. Everybody wants to talk to Tavis.
That's one reason, by the way, why I'm so thrilled to have this conversation with you today. The 3 people I always most hoped would interview me were Phil Donahue, Studs Turkle, and Tavis Smiley. Donahue's retired, Turkle's deceased, so this is a real thrill for me. And the reason why I have such respect for what you do is you have a historically informed conversation of depth and detail.
Be sure to tune in to Tavis Smiley weekday mornings, 9 a.m. to 12 noon on your unapologetically progressive radio station, KBLA Talk 1580.
KBLA Talk 1580.
This is a rather bold pronouncement, but we think we can back it up. If you come across a radio frequency anywhere putting more variety and more diversity on the air than KBLA Talk 1580, we sure would like to hear about your discovery.
You got to have vision.
You can search, but we are confident that you won't find more shows covering more topics, hosted by a more diverse and inclusive lineup of talkers than the squad we have assembled here at KBLA Talk 1580.
This is the time, brothers. This is the time.
We've got something for everybody.
That's right.
Health and healing, history and humor, issues and events, empowerment and entertainment, all in one station.
What's really going on?
Free enterprise, you dig?
KBLA Talk 1580.
Yes.
Oh yeah. We got a lot to talk about.
King Kong ain't got on me. Here comes the brand new flavor in your head.
Race, social justice, sports, politics, art, music, culture. We do it all on the D.L. Hughley Afternoon Show. If you're not tuning in, then you are definitely missing out. It's the D.L. Hughley Afternoon Show weekdays from 2 to 4 only on unapologetically progressive KBLA Talk 1580.
Like a brand new flavor in your head. Yeah.
Is the pen mightier than the sword?
They say the pen is mightier than the sword. At KBLA Talk 1580, we not only have a lot to talk about, we have a lot to write about. Politics, relationships, business, empowerment, and culture. The all-star roster at KBLA Talk 1580 has you covered.
That's what it's all about.
Be sure to follow us on all our socials for our latest book releases, op-eds, essays, and commentaries from our hosts. And, of course, download the KBLA 1580 app as we strive to remain your most trusted, credible, and reliable source for the issues you care about. This is unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580.
What up, baby? young, gifted, and black.
At KBLA Talk 1580, we do more than just talk.
Hey there, I'm Jared Hill, president of the National Association of Black Journalists of Los Angeles, and I just want to say thank you for the benevolent $10,000 donation and scholarships for the next generation of black journalists.
And I'm Haywood Galbraith, photojournalist and founder of the Minority Photojournalism Institute. Thanks, KBLA, for your generous $10,000 scholarship gift to help us train the next generation of black photojournalists.
Congratulations to all the students who will benefit from the scholarship dollars raised at our Black History Month luncheon, honoring black legends in LA media. When we come forward at KBLA Talk 1580, we're bringing everybody with us. Everybody with us. Everybody with us. Everybody with us. Everybody with us.
Access granted.
In a survey conducted by the public opinion research firm Eviderus, KBLA Talk 1580 consistently emerged as the station of choice for black audiences in the Los Angeles media market and beyond. The survey also revealed that the vast majority of black audiences are concerned about the lack of black-owned media and are more likely to listen to talk radio that focuses on issues that impact the black community. For some reason, the other talk stations haven't quite figured that out.
If you think about KFI, well, KFI only has like a 3% black listenership. 3%. So there's a good 97% out there to support a station like KBLA.
At KBLA Talk 1580, we've got your black. Your black. Your black.
Follow the leader.
KBLA Talk 1580.
Follow the leader.
Be sure to follow us on Instagram at KBLA 1580.
Follow the leader.
Are you ready?
The station leading the way with exclusive interviews,
Follow the leader.
stimulating conversation, and intellectual discourse that empowers, enlightens, and informs.
Follow the leader.
Follow the leader at KBLA 1580.
We've got a lot to talk about.
Keep following the leader.
Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Follow the leader. Follow the leader.
Gotta stay fresh, my house shot with a rest spot, shot with a rest spot, shot with a rest spot.
Have you visited us online for the grand opening of KBLA.store? For the best in new merch, gift ideas, books, media, and more, log on to KBLA.store. Be sure to check out our KBLA team favorites at KBLA.store today. That's KBLA.store for all the official merch on your favorite talk radio station, KBLA Talk 1580.
If you're not listening to Tavis Smiley weekday mornings on KBLA Talk 1580, you're missing out. Everybody wants to talk to Tavis.
That's one reason, by the way, why I'm so thrilled to have this conversation with you today. The three people I always most hoped would interview me were Phil Donahue, Studs Terkel, and Tavis Smiley. Donahue's retired, Terkel's deceased, so this is a real thrill for me. And the reason why I have such respect for what you do is you have
I'm back, and I am joined in this hour by Stephanie Keeney Parks. She is an autism expert who works on issues related to race and implicit bias as it relates to the diagnosis and treatment of individuals on the autism spectrum, and also professor from Cal State LA, Sofya Bagdasaryan, is joining us in this hour. So, Stephanie, you were talking about, I've used the term throughout this interview, implicit bias, and you corrected me and said, no, it ain't implicit, it's pretty explicit. Give us, again, some of the examples that you've seen in your professional practice, as well as perhaps even in your own experiences with your son, that really demonstrate the bias in the treatment for individuals with autism.
I mean, they can be very simple things, like if you've done ABA therapy or, my son did this for a while, and they were teaching him things like body parts. But he's so terribly literal that when you showed him only white pictures of people, he never thought that those body parts were his own, because he's brown and his mama's brown and his daddy's are brown and his sisters, we look a little different. And so even like teaching our therapists that incorporating different people into the ways that we teach things, that so kids can see people who look like them so they can master these ideas and then generalize that. Those are really important things. My children are surrounded by Black people. They see us as the normative, right? Especially when they're little. And it can be little tiny things like that to the big moments where people say ridiculous things about my son, like he must be misdiagnosed. He must have ID instead of autism because he's so big and social. Well, I mean, what is big? And what, you know what I mean? Like, is he big because he's a Black kid? Like, what are we doing here? And the thing is, like, I take issue with implicit bias because I think that this is an argument that because racism is so prevalent in every single system all the time, we are facing this all the time, that we can't give it such soft language. Like, we have to give it the language and weight to match the outcomes in which it has, which is, the lack of resources and the lack of opportunities and the stress levels, and all of this really does lead to early death and lives that are not okay, and it's unacceptable. And so I think one of the kind of pitfalls of implicit bias, though it may be a real thing, is that people think, well, that's implicit bias, so I'm not really biased. No, you are really biased. Like, it is showing, it's in the data, it's unexcusable, it's inescapable. Like, we have to really foreground this and really be willing to foreground it to be able to try and enter into this problem better.
No, you're so right. Language is powerful. Language is so powerful. And yes. I think you are right, too, that by saying implicit bias, for years we used the word disparities, right? We wouldn't call it out as racism. We would say, well, there are disparities in treatment for kids who are white versus kids who are Black and brown. There's disparities with wealthy kids versus poor kids. We wouldn't call it out as racism. And then, too, we have to add on top of that how we are all conditioned to not use the word racism, not play, quote unquote, the racism card. And when we do call it out, there's something about us. And so I think we suppress, even when we see something that is racism, we've been conditioned to suppress it and try to give it some other name, try to, sugarcoat it or distort it in a way because we don't want to call it out because it makes people uncomfortable. And you're right. Like, so Professor Bagdasaryan, why in 2023 is any parent that's Black or brown or Asian or any other ethnicity expected to have materials taught to their kids with images and pictures that don't look like their kids? And we know even in medical school, it's taken decades for there to be bodies in medical textbooks that are not white men. And I've interviewed doctors who told me, they can't even detect certain skin diseases and disorders as it relates to brown skinned people because they never studied that in medical school. So why aren't we further along in terms of even the materials that are used to teach kids?
Because anytime we make any sort of progress toward that, there's always a backlash. And the backlash that we're seeing right now is targeting education, even at the K through 12 level, as we see in Florida, where they're trying to erase slavery as ever having existed. So it's, when we're fighting for representation and, you see in popular media people losing their minds over a Black Ariel, it makes it just that much tougher to then say we need representation in children's books, in medical books, in case vignettes we teach social workers or nurses or, what have you. Because if we don't do that, then you have the experiences that Stephanie was mentioning in terms of, well, it can't be autism, it has to be something else. And that's accurate because Black children are more likely, twice as likely to be diagnosed with emotional disturbance, okay, young children. And Native American, I think it's twice as likely for learning disability. And yet even with those disparate racist diagnoses, they get less services. So it's all connected in that way. And whenever we do try to make that kind of progress, and like I said, for example, in social work, we're getting there, but it's slow. And then anytime something is achieved in that regard, there's a backlash immediately.
Yeah, it's so funny because I'm sitting here thinking about when I started talking about Special Needs Network, the nonprofit that I run, doing training, providing training that was culturally sensitive and culturally competent. I can remember someone saying to me, well, it's therapy. All therapy is the same. Like, what do you mean culturally competent therapy? So, Stephanie, I had people challenging me saying, like, it's a lollipop. What do you mean, a culturally competent lollipop? When you and I know, and Dr. Bagdasaryan knows, it's not a lollipop. That therapy is, intensely subjective, and from the materials that's used, from the language that's used, to the examples that are used. But people were really pushing back on me, like I was, talking about something, some foreign object or something. Does that surprise you?
No, it's designed. That's how this is designed to work, right? Like the idea is that, well, all humans are humans, just like the professor's telling us that colorblindness is like this ideal. People want to say, well, it's just a human. But what they're really doing is saying, well, we're just going to use my lens and hope it works for everybody because you've erased then the nuance of everybody else in the room that you may be serving, right? And the language that I expect my son to speak is going to be different. The way I expect him to be in my home, in my community, is going to be different. And so sourcing out those therapists is also difficult, right? Finding Black therapists who can come into my home and our families, because that's another thing. These therapists are very, very intimately involved with our families. They're in our homes. They're teaching our children about life and how to be social in the world. And language is an intimate thing to teach. Like, how do you say good morning, like in your world, right? Like, what is appropriate for you and your family? And it's a very particular thing. But biomedicine has not caught up. They're still kind of in this world of just, COVID affects everybody because it's COVID, right? Without all these kind of nuances play into how that may affect somebody in the world, right? And especially developmental disabilities. It's a very, very difficult, still very difficult space to navigate as a Black family.
Yeah, when we come forward, Dr. Bagdasaryan, I want you to give some tips for families, some strategies. If some family is listening to this and saying, oh my God, that's happened to me. I want people to believe empowered. I want them to know how to handle some of these situations that may arise, what they can say, what they can do, how they can help educate those folks who maybe are coming into their home, who still want to profess that, we're in a colorblind society, because people are still clinging to that very false narrative. Stay with us, KBLA Talk 1580.
Here comes the brand new flavor in your head.
Race, social justice, sports, politics, art, music, culture. We do it all on the D.L. Hughley Afternoon Show. If you're not tuning in, then you are definitely missing out. It's the D.L. Hughley Afternoon Show, weekdays from 2 to 4, only on unapologetically progressive KBLA Talk 1580.
Like a brand new flavor in your head.
Is the pen mightier than the sword?
They say the pen is mightier than the sword. At KBLA Talk 1580, we not only have a lot to talk about, we have a lot to write about. Politics, relationships, business, empowerment, and culture. The all-star roster at KBLA Talk 1580 has you covered.
That's what it's all about.
Be sure to follow us on all our socials for our latest book releases, op-eds, essays, and commentaries from our hosts. And, of course, download the KBLA 1580 app as we strive to remain your most trusted, credible, and reliable source for the issues you care about. This is unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580.
What up, baby?
I'm young, gifted, and black.
KBLA Talk 1580, we do more than just talk.
Hey there, I'm Jared Hill, president of the National Association of Black Journalists of Los Angeles, and I just want to say thank you for the benevolent $10,000 donation and scholarships for the next generation of Black journalists.
And I'm Haywood Galbraith, photojournalist and founder of the Minority Photojournalism Institute. Thanks, KBLA, for your generous $10,000 scholarship gift to help us train the next generation of Black photojournalists.
Congratulations to all the students who will benefit from the scholarship dollars raised at our Black History Month luncheon, honoring Black legends in and LA media. When we come forward at KBLA Talk 1580, we're bringing everybody with us. Everybody with us. Everybody with us. Everybody with us. Everybody with us.
Access granted.
In a survey conducted by the public opinion research firm Eviderus, KBLA Talk 1580 consistently emerged as the station of choice for Black audiences in the Los Angeles media market and beyond. The survey also revealed that the vast majority of Black audiences are concerned about the lack of Black-owned media and are more likely to listen to talk radio that focuses on issues that impact the Black community. For some reason, the other talk stations haven't quite figured that out.
If you think about KFI, well, KFI only has like a 3% Black listenership. 3%. So there's a good 97% out there to support a station like KBLA.
At KBLA Talk 1580, we've got your Black. Your Black. Your Black.
Follow the leader.
KBLA Talk 1580.
Follow the leader.
Be sure to follow us on Instagram at KBLA 1580.
Follow the leader.
Are you ready?
The station leading the way with exclusive interviews,
Follow the leader.
stimulating conversation, and intellectual discourse that empowers, enlightens, and informs.
Follow the leader.
Follow.
I'm back and I'm speaking with Stephanie Keeney Parks and professor from Cal State LA, Sofya Bagdasaryan, about bias and about racism in the diagnosis and treatment of individuals with autism. So, Professor Bagdasaryan, what are some strategies that families can use if they feel like the therapist or a clinician that they're working with is dismissing them, has othered them, or just doesn't understand, who they are as a family, and may have a very limited understanding of the reality that racial structures play in the diagnosis and treatment of autism?
Yeah, so unfortunately, educating providers, the burden of that often falls on families of color, rather than the education system that should have prepared them in the first place. But I think it's all right to gently, at first, depending on the scenario, talk to, whether it's the ABA therapist or whoever is in the home, to just talk to them about how, while we understand that everybody is human, that the context of a child growing up matters. And in that context, we have culture. Mm-hmm. And culture can mean different things to different people. But for your particular family, this is what it means, and it needs to be incorporated. So a lot of education systems, at the very least these days, have curricula that covers what we used to call cultural competency, that now we try to refer to as cultural inclusiveness, but at the very least culturally competent, so that they have some understanding of what different cultures are like in terms of traditions and language and rituals and, taking shoes off or not taking shoes off, some simple things like that. And if they don't, maybe suggest, again, gently, that they educate themselves on those topics before serving that particular, your family. I think it's okay to have those conversations as long as, it's done in a way that isn't creating a conflict or, with anger or whatever. Although anger is understandable. Conflict is understandable. Someone walks into my house without their shoes on. I'm like, okay, how do I politely tell them to take it off? So I get that, Right. It's your child you're talking about. It's completely understandable. But if you want the person to be responsive, having a dialogue that says, I get it, you want to be colorblind, and that's a wonderful ideal, but that's not the reality I am living in. And I need you to do this, this, and this. And, Google is your friend. Find information. Information exists out there about how to help my child from a culturally inclusive space and place. And I would say to parents, information is power. And even if you don't have access to the internet from your home, public libraries do. And even if you're in a place where you can't yourself, use the computer or access the internet in terms of knowledge, you probably know someone who can help you. So rely on your support system to help you navigate these systems, and write everything down. Document, because if you do need to go above someone's head, if you do experience explicit or overt racism, it's helpful to have documentation in that sense. Let's say you have that dialogue with the provider and they disagree, then it's within your right to ask for another provider. And as long as you're documenting and showing that your needs are not being met, I think that's fair. The other thing too is, again, I feel like I get no commission off of Special Needs Network, but I just admire your organization so much. But your parent advocacy program, I would encourage parents to go through that program to learn how to advocate for themselves. But also what can be empowering for families is if they get involved in organizing. And, part of, I know the PAM program, the parent training program that Special Needs Network provides involves, going up to Sacramento or the opportunity to advocate for legislation. And, that act, even if it's, even if they can't go up there, but they're part of the process in some way, can be very empowering to the point that then it helps them to advocate for themselves, for their community. So that would be my suggestion.
No, those are great suggestions. And what about you, Stephanie? So you come at this from a professional standpoint and personal. What advice would you give to parents who may have a provider that is not sensitive to these issues that we've been talking about in this hour?
Your provider works for you. Get rid of them. You don't have to deal with this. You don't have to teach. You don't have to explain. You don't have to beg them to see your family. You don't have to teach, ask them to do things culturally. That is, we have enough going on, taking care of our family and holding our lives together. You can ask for a different provider. And that's immediately what I would do, because our children and our families deserve more. And we don't need to be asked to teach any more about race and racism, especially in those delicate spaces where we're trying to love our babies. And I would also say that everything, the great majority of good things that have happened for my son, right, are in large part because I have had access to Black women who have children with autism. Mm-hmm. And those are the humans that I built my support network with, who have taught me about parenting and therapies and which schools are good and how to advocate, and done it all in a culturally appropriate, sustaining way for me and my family. And I couldn't be more grateful. So if you can find a support network of caregivers who are like yourself, that is hands down the most important thing that I have done for myself and my family.
Wow, that's excellent advice. We know so many families who have kids on the spectrum isolate themselves. They have a lot of, oftentimes, unwarranted shame, and they feel like they've been stigmatized by society. So rather than go out, they go inward, and many, stay in a home. They cut off friends, they cut off family members, they cut off their social life. And what you just said, Stephanie, was do the opposite. Go out there and find your tribe, find people who are like you, people who have understand you and your family, because you'll gain strength from being in those groups. Those groups will empower you. They will nurture you. They will propel you to keep going, even when you feel at your weakest. I want to thank you so much, Stephanie, for the work you're doing. Thank you, obviously, Professor Bagdasaryan. You've done so much work with Special Needs Network and so much work, throughout the Los Angeles community. Both of you are really making an impact, and I'm glad that both of you will be participating tomorrow, Saturday, at Special Needs Network's Tools for Transformation Conference. I would have been promoting this free conference more, but we are sold out, so I haven't been talking about it a whole lot. This is the largest disability rights and social justice conference on the West Coast. It is completely free, and it has some of the nation's leading experts providing state-of-the-art information, education, and providing that community that Stephanie talked about that is so important. And this year we're super excited because former Congresswoman Val Demings from the state of Florida is going to deliver our keynote at our plenary session. She's going to inspire us, help us make sense of what's going on in the world, at the DC level, at the federal level. And then we're going to get down and get real with topics that are helpful to parents, no matter if you're at the early stage of a diagnosis or you have a young adult that is, moving into independent living. We have something for everyone, plus all kinds of free food and giveaways. And I hate that I'm telling you all of that because the conference is sold out. But go on our website, sign up for our newsletter, stay informed. Conferences like this happen every year. We have other events throughout the year where you can get connected to resources, services, and community. We are so honored to have been serving the state of California and really families across this nation for the last 17 years. And we do it because of generous donations from our donors and because of amazing experts like Stephanie and Dr. Bagdasaryan that oftentimes donate their time to help us provide this information to our community. So again, thank you, Stephanie, and thank you, Dr. Bagdasaryan. I will see you both tomorrow. All right, that's it for me. You want to be a part of this conversation, continue to follow me on all social platforms at Areva Martin. You can find me on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and everywhere you are engaged in social media. And you can find out more about Special Needs Network at snnla.org. There is, like I said, a plethora of free programs that we offer throughout the year to families. And even if you're out of California, we have a lot of virtual programs. We have a lot of information that can help you no matter what state you live in. We are dedicated to improving the lives of individuals with autism, other developmental disabilities, people who have a range of disabilities, and particularly those of color, those that live in under-resourced and underserved communities. It is my honor to have been the founder and to continue to be the president and CEO of this amazing organization with so many incredible staff members and volunteers. Next voice that you hear will be Robin Ayers and the Raw Report right here on KBLA Talk 1580.
If you're not listening to Tavis Smiley weekday mornings on KBLA Talk 1580, you're missing out. Everybody wants to talk to Tavis.
That's one reason, by the way, why I'm so thrilled to have this conversation with you today. The three people I always most hoped would interview me were Phil Donahue, Studs Terkel, and Tavis Smiley. Donahue's retired, Terkel's deceased, so this is a real thrill for me. And the reason why I have such respect for what you do is you have a historically informed conversation of depth and detail.
Be sure to tune in at